I can remember the Christmas that we spent down there. We found a little, can't recall if it was a tree or branch or something that we used for a Christmas tree. And we had no lights to put on it, let alone decorations. So we used some 12-volt dial lamp bulbs and soldered wires to them. We had no sockets. Soldered wires to them, and then painted them with fingernail polish to give them some color, and used that to light our tree. Finally, my orders came through for discharge, and another fellow and I piled into the car and drove the almost 200 miles to the discharge center, which was near Houston. We didn't waste any time. We were out of there first thing in the morning. Took our dungarees along, even though we couldn't wear them in public. When we were in the service, we knew that as soon as we were discharged, then we could wear anything we wanted to. I can remember the talk that the officer gave at the ceremony, mustering us out, and I thought it was the most beautiful talk I'd ever heard. It was well given, excellent cadence and delivery and the whole thing, but it must have been enhanced by the fact that we were suddenly going to be free of the service. Then we drove back to Corpus Christi, got our things together, and headed home. This was quite a trip. We made one stop, one tourist-type stop at Carlsbad Caverns, New Mexico. It was a little off the beaten path in White City, and it was a pretty warm day. We were driving up the highway when suddenly one of the rear tires blew, and the result was that, in spite of all my efforts, the car was turned completely around, headed the other direction, over on the shoulder of the road, with a damaged wheel, edge of it turned over, rolled over. So we put on the spare and got to town and got it repaired, and so far as I know, it was fine ever since. Carlsbad Caverns was pretty impressive for me. Mary didn't care for them because she tends toward claustrophobia. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, all those beautiful caverns. On our return trip to Oregon, we went through California rather than up through Utah, because I wanted to visit my Aunt Florence and Uncle Charlie, who lived in Los Angeles. When we got to the house, I knocked on the door, and who should come to answer the door but what I took to be a thin Uncle Corfield. There was a strong family resemblance there. It was my Uncle Charlie. whom I hadn't seen since I was just a little boy. Aunt Florence was there, of course, and so was their daughter Rosemary, who was a young teenager by then. It seemed I was having some trouble with the car, and Uncle Charlie soon put an end to that. He had a way with machines. He had a project of sawing up some wood that was in the yard, and to do it he was using a crosscut saw powered by a gasoline engine. It caused it to reciprocate. The saw, that is. We stayed with them a few days and then headed on to Oregon. My mother Doris and her husband Glenn Bennett had bought a farm in Malino, Oregon when we were in Astoria. So that's where we headed for. Unfortunately, they only had one place for us to sleep. It was not a bedroom, but in the living room on a fold-out couch. Mary got a job with Beatty and Hibbard, attorneys in Oregon City. And I looked for a job but wasn't finding one. Consequently, I joined the 5220 Club. This was the GI Bill for returning veterans of World War II who could get $20 a month, $20 a month stipend for 52 months, or a year, of course. Of course, you had to actively be looking for a job, which I kept doing. Now, Mary got a job at Beatty and Hibbard, attorneys in Oregon City. And Glenn was working at Publisher's Paper in the wood mill, splitting blocks. Glenn was working rotating shifts, so sometimes he'd be coming home when Mary was going to work. Sometimes he'd be going to work in the middle of the afternoon when Mary was coming home. It was quite a rat race. We never knew who was coming and who was going. And of course, Mom had to try to fix meals for all of these situations. Of course, I'd take Mary into work so I could try to find a job. So far to no avail. The only place we had to sleep was on a fold-out couch. The folks wanted to fix up a chicken house for us to sleep in, but we vetoed that. And before long, we put our mustering out pay and some other money together and bought a house in the Sunset District of West Lynn. While we were there, I temporarily got a job at Publisher's Paper Mill in Oregon City as a pulp tester. For some reason that didn't work out very well, so I went back on the dole. I finally got a job at Marine Electric on Thurman Street in Portland. So the result was that we sold the house in West Lynn to people by the name of Rocket and moved into Hedges Boarding House on 24th and Irving in Portland. Boarding house has been torn down in favor of a more modern building. My job at Marine Electric was to take care of the supplies and inventory them. This was quite a job in itself. Marine Electric was primarily a motor rewinding shop, and I learned quite a little bit about motors while I was there, and how the rewinding is done and what's involved with it. It takes some elaborate machinery to shape some of those coils for some of those motors. Well, we were at Hedges Boarding House that I made the decision to go to college and enrolled at Vanport Extension Center, which was in the old Vanport housing area between Portland and Vancouver. It was in the Delta Park, what is now the Delta Park area, in the lowland, which was actually west of the old 99 highway, parallel to what is now the I-5 freeway. Port was a holdover from the days of the shipyards during the war, and there were several thousand people living in that area, that housing area. Then came the flood in the spring of that year. I believe it was 1947. And the people who operated the college had enough foresight, enough warning that they got most of the records out of the school and onto high ground. So the result was that after the flood, we were able to go to various of the high school buildings to finish our studying, finish out that year. We happened to be assigned to Grant High School, so you might say I'm an alumni of Grant High. Here I was an alumni of Jefferson High School, attending Grant, our greatest nemesis in the football field. It was during the time that we were at Hedges Boarding House that Mary got a job at Willamette Iron and Steel, left Beatty and Hibbard. That was too long a drive, no way for her to get there anyway. So she'd take the bus to Willamette Iron every day. We then moved from Hedges Boarding House to an apartment on Madison Street, just off 18th. When we were living there, that Mary became pregnant with Becky. When I finished college, finished the first year of electrical engineering, I then got a job at Crown Willamette Paper Company, Crown Willamette Publishers in West Lynn, Oregon, as a paper tester. So the result was that we left Portland and moved to Gladstone, Oregon, to some brand new apartments that were built by a man by the name of Voget. So we were now in Voget Apartments. Had been plagued. First, Mary had to leave Willamette Iron and Steel, and we moved out to Gladstone. So we were having to get along on the wages I was getting at the paper mill, which were nothing very great. The days were counting down for the birth of that baby, and I was trying to get ready for it and fix a bassinet for it to sleep in. We kept hoping for a girl, so I was busy building we had the basket for it to sleep in. I was busy building a support, a roll-around frame to put the basket on, something that would fold up and go in the car, something that had casters on it. And I was plagued right at that time with a swelling of my hands and feet. It was evidently some kind of an allergic reaction that I was having to something. Never figured out what it was. Doctors gave me antihistamine, which eventually helped. There I was out in the garage, moved the car out of the garage, the old Plymouth that we still had. I was out there with the vacuum cleaner, with the clean new hose. In order to keep the hose clean, I had taken old socks and covered the whole hose, socks and rubber bands. The basket was pink, and I had white paint. So in order to color the paint, to give it some kind of a tint, I took saved the little color packets that came with the white margarine that we bought in those days. Little packets that came with the margarine to color the margarine if you wanted to color it. And I dumped those in the paint, and the result was that I had instead of being yellow, it was slight pink color. So that was the pink paint that I sprayed with the vacuum cleaner on the frame that held the bassinet. It was quite a project. Well, our family physician was osteopathic, Dr. Burnham, and he did everything, manipulations and the whole thing, delivering of babies and everything. So when the big day came, I took Mary into the osteopathic hospital, which was in on Northwest 18th at that time. Funny little old building. When I say take Mary into the hospital, we're talking about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and It was kind of exciting because we didn't stop for red lights. We just went right on through. The timing of the contractions were getting close enough that Mary didn't feel that we should wait. We should get there just as soon as possible. Well, Becky was born, I believe, about 3 hours later. And no prouder father walked the land that morning than I. As soon as I made sure that mother and baby were well settled and there was nothing more I could do, I got into the car and headed for Milano. Since Doris and Glenn had no telephone, that was the only way that I could get word to them, was to drive out there. The road was longer that morning than I can ever remember. I wanted to tell my mother as soon as possible that we had a Rebecca Catherine White, a baby daughter who was just perfect. As soon as I got there and told my mother her name, she shortened it to Becky Kate, and almost always referred to her as, from then on, as Becky Kate. I don't know why the name Kate was something she was so fond of, but she was. Ever since before I was in the service, I'd had migraine headaches. This was a classic migraines that were preceded by partial blindness, or as Dad called them, as he also had them, the light show. Well, strangely enough, once I had a daughter had been born to us, the migraines ended. I still had the partial blindness that preempted them, but the headache never came. What a blessing. Two blessings together. A beautiful baby daughter and no more migraine headaches. What a joy it was to bring that little bundle home. And place it in that bassinet. First people to see the baby were Bob and Marge Medeiros, who lived right next door to us. They had a little boy, Bobby, also. At about 3 months, Mary's mother, Dorothy, became so anxious to see that baby that she borrowed the money for plane fare and sent it to us. So Mary and Becky headed for Texas. For some reason, the Portland airport was temporarily closed, and the planes had to come in and out of the Troutdale airport. The plane came into the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, and there to meet them, of course, were Mary's mother and father, Bill and Dorothy Allen, and on the way home, Grandpa Bill held that baby just about all the way. He was really enamored of that little youngster. While there at Grandpa and Grandma's, Becky learned to sit up by herself. I guess she felt she had to do this because her mother was ill, so she was going to have to learn to do things by herself. Her mother had what the doctors there diagnosed as malaria. She had been ill on several occasions here in Oregon before she left, and the doctors had no idea what her problem was. Fortunately, she went to Texas and found doctors there who were familiar with the ailment. I can still remember seeing pictures of Grandpa Allen with the automobile car seat over his shoulders, Becky bouncing in the seat in front of him. Becky bounced so much in her life that her dad called her Becky Bumps. Well, all pleasant visits had to end, so my family came back to me. And one of the first things that happened after their return was new neighbors in the Boget apartment complex. This was in the form of Betty and Jim Clinton and their young son, Gary, first of two. Ron would follow in a couple of years. Mary met Betty down at the wash house, where they spent a lot of hours together washing diapers. And of course there were long clotheslines to hang the diapers out on. That was before the days of clothes dryers. The apartments were not very fancy. After all, they were built out of war housing, sections of barracks housing that came from Camp Adair and down near Corvallis. They were brought up by the Vogets and reassembled, and each apartment had a garage, and then the apartment itself, which consisted of a living room and farther walking through the living room, you went either into the kitchen and out the back door, or else you walked through the other door into the bedroom and the bathroom. To make our apartment a little more interesting, we bought some sections of shelving and got the landlord to agree to pay for paint and wallpaper. We used the shelving as a kind of a room divider, which made the room a lot more attractive and gave us storage that we didn't have before, like bookcases and the like. We painted the bookcases green and put a post up to the ceiling from the end of them, and had wallpaper that had ivy on it. And I guess it was more expensive than the landlord expected because they put up kind of a fuss when they gave them the bill. However, they had made the agreement, so they stood by it. We enjoyed the consequences. Before long, we bought a little wagon for Mary to pull Becky in. And the two of them would start out to the grocery store, which was about half a mile from where we lived. She'd buy the groceries and pull Becky back home. Of course, it was always a problem to keep Becky from pawing through the groceries just to see what was in there.